Have you ever felt like a magnet for chaos? Like no matter where you go, the same kinds of draining, manipulative people keep showing up in your life. You set boundaries. You walk away. But somehow, the pattern repeats itself. It's easy to think you're just too nice, too emotional, or simply unlucky. But what if the reason runs deeper, into parts of yourself you haven't fully seen? In this video, we'll explore the psychological truth behind why you keep attracting toxic people through the lens of Carl Jung's most powerful insights. This isn't about blaming yourself, it's about freeing yourself. Because once you understand the silent signals you're sending and the hidden wounds that shape them, everything changes. You'll stop being a target and start becoming a fortress. Let's dive in. There's something most people never suspect. You don't just meet toxic people, you invite them silently, without even knowing. You think you're unlucky. You believe you're just too kind. But beneath all of that, there's a quiet frequency you're broadcasting. And those who thrive on control, chaos, and manipulation, they're tuned into it like moths to flame. This isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. Because until you see the signal you're sending, you can't ever stop the pattern from repeating. It often starts in moments of self-doubt. You're burnt out from keeping peace in relationships that feel one-sided. Maybe you've just left something toxic behind, a draining friendship, a controlling partner, but then someone new enters, wearing a different face but bringing the same storm. And you wonder, why does this keep happening? The answer doesn't lie in what you're doing wrong, but in what still lives unhealed inside you. Wounds have energy, and emotional wounds, especially those shaped in childhood, emit a silent call. It's not a conscious one, but it's real. The fear of abandonment, the need to prove your worth, the ache of not being enough. These things don't just shape your self-image, they shape your relationships. Carl Jung called this the unconscious projection. When parts of you remain in shadow, unseen, unspoken, they don't vanish. They manifest through others. The parts of you that feel small will draw in people who make you feel invisible. The parts of you that crave control will attract the ones who dominate. It's not karma, it's reflection. It's your inner architecture being mirrored back through outer events. But here's the shift. This doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you're powerful, because if your inner world shapes who comes toward you, then healing it changes everything. This is why self-discovery isn't optional. It's survival. When you begin the journey inward, not to judge, but to understand, you stop sending the old signal. You stop playing the role of rescuer, fixer, overgiver. And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. The toxic ones no longer see you. You become invisible to manipulation, not by hiding, but by no longer needing to be seen through wounded eyes. So start small. Sit with the discomfort instead of numbing it. When you feel the pull to over-explain yourself, pause. Ask, what part of me needs to be rescued right now? That moment of awareness is a fracture in the old pattern. It's the first time you step outside the cycle, instead of being trapped inside it. Healing begins not in the grand declarations, but in the quiet refusal to abandon yourself again. Because what you heal no longer controls you, and what no longer controls you cannot attract what once fed on your pain. This shift is not instant, it's daily. It's the quiet decision to come home to yourself again and again. And as you begin to reclaim what was lost, another question will rise. What if the people who've hurt you the most were never the true danger, but only reflections of a deeper disconnection within? This thought stirs something ancient in you, a quiet knowing that perhaps the real wound wasn't what they did, but what you had once accepted. The way you swallowed your truth just to keep someone close. The way you twisted yourself smaller, softer, quieter, hoping not to be abandoned again. But this is not a story of blame. It's a story of return, And to return, you must descend into the shadow, not to fight it, but to finally see it. Carl Jung didn't just talk about the shadow as darkness. He saw it as an unlived life. All the parts of you you've denied, disowned, or been told were too much. Anger, ambition, desire, boundaries. They didn't disappear. They went underground, and from that hidden place, they began to choose for you. You think you're being generous, but you're avoiding conflict. You think you're calm, but you're actually numb. You think you're loving, but underneath, you're afraid of not being chosen. The shadow doesn't lie. It waits until you are ready to look without flinching. And here's where emotional intelligence becomes more than a buzzword. It becomes your gateway to freedom. Because when you begin to identify your own projections, you interrupt the spell. You stop mistaking other people's chaos for your responsibility. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to hold. This is the first step to building inner strength. Not the kind that performs for others, but the kind that holds steady in silence. The kind that says, I see you, but I no longer collapse to keep you. It's in these quiet rebellions, pausing before you say yes out of fear, choosing peace over approval, walking away without needing to explain, that you begin to master your emotional boundaries. Not out of spite, out of reverence. For the self you buried so long ago just to survive. In this space of awareness, clarity emerges. What once felt like chaos becomes information. What once felt like failure becomes feedback. Your psychological self-defense sharpens, not as a wall, but as discernment. You begin to move differently, speak with less urgency, choose with more care. People feel the shift, and those who once preyed on your uncertainty now find no entry point. It's not that you've become hard, you've simply become whole. So when the old patterns rise, the temptation to please, the urge to fix, the fear of being alone, meet them with a deeper question. What part of me still believes I need to be hurt in order to be loved? That question is not a weapon, it's a mirror. And in that reflection, you'll see a self no longer reaching outward for rescue, but standing quietly in her own light. Because the journey is not about avoiding toxic people. It's about becoming so rooted in your truth that toxicity cannot breathe around you. And in that stillness, something shifts. Not just in your relationships, but in your identity. You are no longer defined by what you tolerate, but by what you honor. And honoring yourself doesn't require grand declarations. It begins in the quiet, when you choose not to chase, not to explain, not to shrink. It's in those invisible moments when no one is watching that a new self is being shaped. One that no longer mistakes emotional chaos for connection or silence for safety. One that finally sees, every time you abandon yourself to be accepted, you deepen the wound you're trying to heal. This is where Jung's insight becomes not just theory, but a mirror. He believed that the collective unconscious, the invisible field of inherited beliefs and roles, often pulls us into stories not fully ours. If you were raised in a home where love had to be earned through compliance or perfection, chances are your nervous system still confuses control with care. And without noticing, you begin attracting dynamics that replay this script. The toxic people aren't the root of your suffering, they are the echo. But echoes lose power when the voice that created them stops speaking, when you rewrite the story from within. That begins with self-discovery, not as a buzzword, but as a slow turning inward, to ask, where did I first learn that love meant pain? Who taught me that being chosen was something I had to bleed for? These aren't easy questions, but they hold the key to authentic confidence, the kind that isn't loud or polished but quietly rooted, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen because it finally sees itself. In that stillness, you begin to draw new boundaries, not as defenses, but as definitions. You no longer say yes when your body says no. You no longer keep people warm who bring cold to your spirit. You no longer fear being alone because solitude has become a sacred place, a space for emotional intelligence training, not emotional exhaustion. And as you practice this, you'll notice something subtle yet powerful. Toxic people start to fall away, not because you push them, but because the version of you they fed on no longer exists. This isn't punishment, it's psychological self-defense, a quiet reclaiming of space that was always meant for peace. So here's the invitation. Begin each day with a small check-in. Ask yourself, where am I abandoning myself today? And then choose one moment, just one, to stay. Stay with your truth. Stay with your no. Stay with your worth. This isn't self-help, it's self-respect. Because when you stop watering illusions, what remains is real. And from that soil, something steady begins to grow, not a performance, not a persona, but the real you, unmasked and unafraid. And yet, growth doesn't mean you'll never feel pulled again. Old patterns don't vanish because you understand them. They return as whispers, subtle and familiar. Sometimes they show up in the eyes of a charming stranger. Sometimes in the apology comes too late, or in the silence you've always mistaken for peace. But the difference now is that you notice, and in that noticing, you reclaim choice. Carl Jung described this process as integration, not killing your shadow, but making it conscious. You no longer run from the part of you that once sought chaos to feel alive. You sit with it, you ask it questions, you hold its trembling hand instead of locking it in the basement. Because until you bring it into the light, it will keep choosing for you in the dark. And this is where emotional boundaries are no longer about distance, but about clarity. You don't block people out, you invite yourself in. You become intimate with your own nervous system, with your own unmet needs. You start to distinguish between a connection that feeds your growth and one that drains your spirit. This isn't arrogance. It's emotional intelligence training, the sacred practice of protecting what is tender in you, without apology. You'll feel the difference in your body before your mind can name it. A deep breath instead of tight lungs. A quiet heart instead of racing thoughts. That's how mental clarity techniques anchor you, not through overthinking, but through stillness. You stop reacting, you start responding, not to fix, not to please, but to stay true. And it's here that authentic confidence rises, not as loudness, but as presence. You walk into rooms without shrinking, you speak without rehearsing, you rest without guilt, because you no longer need others to prove you're worthy. You feel it, gently but undeniably, at your core, that you are enough, not despite your journey, but because of it. So give yourself permission, not just to let go of who's hurting you, but to let go of who you had to become to survive them. That armor, once necessary, is now a weight. And underneath it is someone softer, wiser, freer. Not perfect, but whole. And wholeness isn't something you chase, it's something you return to again and again, every time you choose yourself in the smallest of ways. And sometimes that smallest way is simply this. Not answering, not explaining, not fixing what was never yours to mend. In a world that demands you perform, your worth, your goodness, your strength, silence becomes a sacred rebellion. It is not a weakness. It is powerful to choose stillness. It is emotional boundaries whispering, this is where I end and where the world begins. You've likely felt the pull to abandon yourself before, maybe in relationships where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned, or in environments where your calmness was mistaken for passivity. Your emotional intelligence was overlooked because it didn't come with sharp elbows or loud opinions. And yet, here you are, still soft, still standing. That too is a kind of strength the world doesn't teach but desperately needs. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how do you become? when you've spent years fragmenting to fit in. You begin by slowing down, by listening, by allowing discomfort to speak. That's the terrain of self-discovery. Not glamorous, not linear, often quiet, but real. And in that realness, your clarity grows roots. This is the work of psychological self-defense. It isn't about building higher walls, but deeper foundations. It's about understanding that when someone's love costs you your peace, it's not love, it's a transaction. And you, my friend, are not a currency. You are not here to be earned or consumed. You are here to exist, to feel, to evolve, to live with authentic confidence, not perform it. And when the voices return, the inner critic, the old fears, the doubt that says, "Who do you think you are?" You don't fight them with force. You meet them with presence. You remind them of the stillness inside you, the inner strength built not from noise, but from truth lived in silence. This is where your power regenerates, quietly, deeply, without permission. So when the world tells you to do more, explain more, give more, pause. Place your hand on your own chest and feel your breath return to you. That's where clarity lives. That's how you reclaim yourself without fanfare, like a tree choosing not to chase the wind, but to deepen its roots in the unseen. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is to stay with yourself, in the moment, in the breath that asks nothing of you but to simply be. But of course, staying isn't easy when you've been taught that love is earned by leaving yourself behind. When every nervous system imprint still flinches at silence, fearing it might mean abandonment. When stillness feels more dangerous than chaos. Because in chaos, at least you know your role. At least you know what to fix. And so, you chase, you contort, you explain. Not because you want to, but because somewhere inside a child still believes, if I can just be enough, they won't leave. That belief becomes a loop that attracts the very people who confirm it. This is the invisible gravity of your shadow, the part of you you've disowned, now dancing in the faces of others. The more you deny it, the louder it echoes. But what if you paused? Not to correct the outside world, but to turn inward. What if, instead of fighting to be chosen, you chose to meet the frightened part of you you've been running from? That is integration, not self-improvement, not achievement, but a slow, sacred returning to all of you, even the messy, even the afraid. You begin to see, not every trigger is a wound to fix. Some are mirrors, invitations, projections asking, is this still true about you? And suddenly, emotional self-control isn't about suppression, it's about space. The space to respond instead of react. The space where self-discovery happens not through force, but gentle witnessing. In that space, you stop demanding from others what you're afraid to give yourself. Respect, peace, truth. You stop seeking approval like oxygen and instead breathe into your own presence. Your mental clarity no longer depends on external validation. It begins to root in solitude, in reflection, in the quiet choice to no longer abandon yourself. And slowly, something shifts. You're no longer magnetized to chaos. You're no longer addicted to the chase. Because now, you recognize that not everything intense is love, and not every connection is meant to last. You begin to feel the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between being needed and being nourished. The inner noise calms, the craving softens, and in its place, a deep knowing rises. Not loud, not desperate, just steady, just real, just enough. And maybe for the first time, that's no longer disappointing. It's freeing, because when you stop performing for love, you begin remembering the kind of love that never required performance to begin with. The one you owed yourself. The one that sounds like peace when the room goes quiet. The one that doesn't demand you shrink, edit, or explain your softness. That kind of love doesn't need to be chased. It needs to be recognized. And recognition only comes in stillness. This is how emotional boundaries start forming. Not from rules, but from reverence. Reverence for your time, for your energy, for your nervous system, for the parts of you that were once told they were too much or not enough. Those labels were never yours to carry. They were projections, reflections of someone else's unresolved story handed to you like a script, but you don't have to act it out anymore. You get to rewrite. And yes, it's hard at first. When you start saying no to chaos, the silence can feel excruciating, like you're floating without gravity, like you're no one's priority. But in that silence, a deeper truth arises. That peace isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of distortion. You're not lonely, you're detoxing from the noise. The work now is emotional intelligence training, not in theory, but in presence. It's the daily practice of asking, does this bring me closer to who I'm becoming, or pull me back into what I've outgrown? That question becomes your compass, and with each answer, your authentic confidence grows, not loud, but undeniable. Eventually, the people who once excited your wounds no longer spark anything in you. Not because you're bitter, but because you're whole. You've stopped auditioning. You've stopped needing someone to choose you to feel worthy. Because now you understand, the only person who needs to choose you is you. And in that choosing, something sacred unfolds. You no longer enter rooms trying to prove your value. You simply are the value. That shift isn't arrogance, it's alignment. And when you live from that place, toxic people stop feeling magnetic. They feel exhausting. Because now, your energy is calibrated for truth, for clarity, for self-respect that doesn't waver depending on who's watching. You simply are the value. That shift isn't arrogance, it's alignment. And when you live from that place, toxic people stop feeling magnetic. They feel exhausting. Because now, your nervous system no longer confuses intensity with connection. You begin to see that what once felt like passion was often just a collision between your abandonment wound and their emotional unavailability. It wasn't fate. It was familiarity. It wasn't love. It was a reenactment of your earliest longing for approval. And in that realization, something soft but radical unfolds. The decision to stop abandoning yourself in the name of connection. You begin to build emotional boundaries not as walls, but as thresholds, portals that require presence, not performance, to cross. You stop opening your heart to anyone who knocks loudly and start listening for those who speak in the quiet language of safety. This is the soil where self-discovery grows. Not in constant reaction, but in chosen stillness. You start to notice your own patterns, not with shame, but with curiosity. The moment you pause before saying yes, the breath you take before responding to a text that once pulled you in like a riptide, these become acts of emotional discipline. Not cold, not distant, just rooted. In this space, authentic confidence isn't about being untouched by pain. It's about no longer needing to be rescued from it. You hold yourself. You soothe your own trigger before demanding someone else behave differently. And in doing so, you reclaim power, not over others, but within yourself. That's where mental clarity begins, not in controlling the external, but in decluttering the internal. You no longer try to read between the lines of someone's inconsistency. You no longer take crumbs and call it kindness, because now your standards aren't rigid, they're sacred. They're not rules, they're reminders of how far you've come in remembering who you are beneath the coping, beneath the roles, beneath the fear of being too much or not enough. And that remembering, quiet, slow, unwavering, becomes your anchor. You're no longer waiting to be chosen, you're choosing. And in that choosing, you begin to see clearly. Not everyone deserves access to the healed version of you if they only ever spoke to the wounded one. You attract what you haven't yet healed. Throughout this journey, we explored the silent pull of your shadow, the masks of projection, and the quiet liberation that begins the moment you choose integration over repetition. You now know, toxic people aren't just random. They reflect the parts of you still asking to be seen, to be held, to be transformed. From Carl Jung's insights to your own lived experience, we've traced how emotional boundaries, authentic confidence, and mental clarity techniques begin not in theory, but in attention. And today, that awareness is your power. So here's one small, profound practice. Each time you feel drawn to someone who destabilizes your peace, pause and ask, what familiar feeling am I chasing? And who taught me to call that love? Then breathe. The space between that awareness and your next action is where healing lives. Let go of the need to be chosen. Choose your inner strength instead. Let go of chasing peace from others. Build it through emotional intelligence training and self-discovery habits. That's how you stop the cycle. That's how you rise. If this message resonates, share your experience in the comments. What pattern are you breaking? What truth are you finally ready to live? Your story may be the mirror someone else needs. And if you want more content like this, on psychological self-defense, emotional boundaries, and the power of perception, subscribe now. Join a community that chooses depth over drama and healing over habit. You're not here to repeat the wound. You're here to rewrite the story. So start with this moment. And don't look back.